we go to the hotline right now where we welcome in national college football writer for CBS Sports.
Oh, here we go.
Shehan Jeyarajah joining us here on the Get Right. Shehan, what's going on?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you joining us. Okay, I got a quick question. Got to get this out the way.
Yep.
Number one, are you a pro wrestling fan?
I am not, unfortunately.
Yes.
Oh, because I was going to ask you, do you know? I guess I'm going to ask you now. Do you know who the modern day Maharaja is? Do you know who Jinder Mahal is?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yes, I do know that much.
Okay. Are you a Jinder Mahal fan? Or are you
You might be pushing your luck.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm just.
I mean, look, I got to support the culture, but that's about as much as I can do.
Fantastic. Speaking of supporting the culture,
appreciate you. Thank you.
Did my friend here, Kevin Gray, did he get a nice, decent enough pronunciation of your name?
Oh, he nailed it. He got it exactly right.
All right. Hey, shout out to you for putting that in your bio. Appreciate that. Thank you. Appreciate you.
I'm a big fan of your work. We're both big fans of your work, and I'm glad to have you on. I know that you're locally based, and Big 12 gets a lot of attention around these parts, so I will begin with the biggest part of this. I mean, look, we're doing the Texas back thing again, apparently. They've been voted to win the Big 12. They're the favorites to win the Big 12 by a large margin. And so we're just going to start here. The Texas is back thing. Why is it not real this year? Or why is it real this time?
Yeah, well, I'll also direct people to CBSSports.com. I believe our Big 12 expert picks will be coming out tomorrow. Okay. And when it does, you'll see that I also picked Texas to win the Big 12. So, for people who don't know, I mean, look, obviously we hear the Texas overhype thing every offseason, but the last time that Texas was picked to win the Big 12 by Big 12 media was 2009. So it's been that long. It's been 14 years. They were picked, of course, to do it this year in the preseason poll. And look, I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I do think that you look at the state of this roster right now, right? I mean, a lot of returning experience, a very talented roster. Obviously, that's nothing new. But I think that, when you look at Texas right now, they arguably have three of the top five players in the Big 12 this upcoming season. I'd go with tight end Jatavian Sanders, left tackle Kelvin Banks, linebacker Jalen Ford, and I'm not even getting into their quarterback situation. I'm not even getting into their receiver situation. I'm not even getting into some of the defensive linemen that they have, who I think have a chance to be pretty good. So I think from a top-end talent perspective, they've got more returners than they've had in a pretty long time. The other part of it, too, is that I think when you look around the Big 12 and you look at the top contenders with Texas for the Big 12, there are huge question marks everywhere else. Kansas State is probably their top competition, but they just lost their two best players in Deuce Vaughn and Felix Anudike-Uzomah. You look at Oklahoma, I mean, they're still replacing 30 or 40 players once again this offseason after 6 and 7 year. TCU just lost 4 or 5 All-America caliber players to the NFL. Texas Tech, I think they have a lot of upside, but again, they also lost their top NFL draft pick in 60 years. So when you look at sort of the state of the other contenders in the conference, I don't think that there's anybody who is at the top of their development curve to the level of Texas. And so this is partially because of what Texas is doing. This is partially of the context of the Big 12 right now. And look, the reality is, I mean, every year since 2017, since they brought back the Big 12 title game, one team from that had made the Big 12 title game has been picked fourth or lower each year since we've brought it back in 2017. There's no question that there are teams that are capable of rising up and beating Texas and knocking them off. But I do think that they deserve to be the preseason top team in the Big 12. And the other part of it, too, is I think that they deserve the pressure of needing to pull it off this year in their final year in the Big 12.
Speaking of Texas, let's come to the Metroplex itself with the TCU, obviously coming off of a magical year last year, making the national championship game before obviously knowing what happened in the national championship game to Georgia. What does this year mean for Sonny Dykes in that program, opening up against Deion Sanders in Colorado? What do you see for TCU this upcoming season?
Yeah, I mean, that first game is going to be a lot of fun. I'll be able to be on hand for that one. But I think that whenever you look at this upcoming season, I think this is going to be important just to set a new baseline for what TCU is going to be. Like I mentioned, I mean, Max Duggan's gone. He finished second in Heisman voting. Quentin Johnson was a first-round NFL draft pick. Steve Avila on the offensive line was a second-round draft pick. Kendre Miller was an All-American caliber player at running back. And they have to replace all these pieces. So, I mean, it's going to be a very new roster. Also, offensive coordinator Garrett Riley left for Clemson as well. So it's going to be completely different in a lot of ways. But this is, I think, going to be an important year because you look back to 2018, every single year since then, there's kind of been a team that's ridden close game luck to make the Big 12 title game. And you look at those teams the year after, they tend to go only about 500. I mean, you go look back at 2021 Baylor, they go 6-7 the next year. You look at 2020 Iowa State, they go 7-6 the next year, so on and so forth. I mean, it happens every single year. This is going to, I think, be a good opportunity for TCU to prove whether they have sort of that baseline level of talent to where a down year, to where a rebuilding year, is that a 6-win season or is that an 8 or 9-win season? So they added a lot of really nice players in the transfer portal. JoJo Earl is a receiver who played at Alito, who I think is going to have a big year for them. He transferred from Alabama. Chandler Morris was the guy who won the starting quarterback job coming out of camp last year before getting hurt. And he obviously led Highland Park to state championships as well, right in the Metroplex. So lots and lots of talent. I think the defense has a chance to be even better in some ways. But this is, I think, going to be a very important transitionary year for Sonny Dykes, just to set a new baseline for what this program can be.
We're talking to Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports right here on 105.3 The Fan. And Shehan, I really wanted and would have loved to have this segment be entirely about, kind of previewing the college football season that's coming. But of course, realignment continues to, rear its ugly head. The ACC apparently is reported to be looking at Cal, Stanford, and of course in the Metroplex, SMU. The thing that I find interesting about all the realignment is that, obviously grant of rights and all this stuff is happening because of money, really. And there's teams like SMU that are, or maybe not SMU, but like there are teams that are possibly taking less, or like SMU, maybe leaving all of the money on the table for TV rights for a short period of time. Like, how much of is that part of this intriguing you? Like, how cautious should we be about that part of, teams moving different conferences and possibly leaving all the money on the table?
Yeah, SMU is such an interesting team because they're in a unique place. SMU is a small private school, obviously in the Dallas Metroplex. But, the alumni base isn't huge, but there's a lot of money because of the historic ties that they have in Highland Park and University Park. So they're in such they're almost like there's no other program like it in college football in some ways because they do have the resources to compete, but they don't necessarily have the prestige or the platform being in the American Athletic Conference right now. And so, look, as a member of the American Athletic Conference, they make about $7 million per year in television revenue. And so, look, obviously they won't be receiving the $30+ million, the $40+ million likely that other ACC teams will be receiving. But I think that that's how they're looking at it, right? It is the perspective of we're not losing $40 million a year. We're losing $7 million a year. And we just need to make up that gap and obviously find ways to still build for at least the next 7 years. Now, we saw Oregon and Washington sort of do a similar thing. They're going to be making half of the rest of the Big Ten for the next 6 years, and they're willing to make that bet to lock up security long term. So it's a unique position to be in. For Stanford and Cal, the rumored number right now is that they could be making potentially $8 or $9 million right now whenever they move conferences and television rights. And that, I think, is going to be a more interesting situation, maybe a bigger issue whenever you're going from making more than $20 million to making less than 10. But I think for SMU, this is a unique program that I think might be able to close that gap. And ultimately, what they want more than anything else is relevance. I mean, people who support that program remember the days of the Pony Express in the 80s and what it meant to the city and what it meant to the school and what it meant to the region. And, I think that they know that as a group of 5 team, they will never truly be able to get back to that point. And so, is it worth giving up that amount of money to get sort of the nominal status as Power 5? Well, I think that's a gamble they're willing to make.
Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, LSU make up the top 5 of the AP Top 25 going into this year's season. Give me a team outside of the top 5 that we're not talking about right now that's got a legitimate chance to make a run at a national championship this year.
Yeah, I think that whenever you start to talk about that top 5, the one that I think really is a chance to crash the party is probably Florida State. Florida State, they won 10 games last year for the first time in a couple of years. They bring back almost as much production as anybody in the country. after last year, including sixth-year quarterback Jordan Travis. And the other part of it, too, is they brought in the nation's number 2 transfer class to bolster that group. So you're not just talking about having, Johnny Wilson at receiver. You're not just talking about having Jared Verse at defensive end or obviously Jordan Travis, but you're talking about adding to that group. Hakeem Williams was a 5-star receiver prospect who's going to have an opportunity to contribute. Keon Coleman from Michigan State, a big-time player. Fentrell Cypress at cornerback. I mean, they are potentially going to be pretty loaded across the board at their starting positions. And the other part of this, too, is that playing in the ACC, especially, they play LSU in week 1, but it's going to be a relative home game. It's a neutral site, but it's closer to home. The situation for them that's going to be interesting is if they're able to survive LSU, I mean, they really just have to beat Clemson 1 of 2 times, and they likely have a trip to the college football playoff. Now, the question's going to be, can Florida State or almost anybody else compete with Georgia and with Ohio State and with Alabama from a talent perspective? But in a year where all 3 programs are undergoing transitions in some ways, why not? Why can't Florida State be the team that maybe pushes their way up and has an opportunity to crash the party? Now, the other team I'm going to mention too is Washington. A lot of the same factors that we're talking about, tons of returning production. Behind Ohio State, probably the second best receiving core in the entire country, led by Romo Dunze and Jalen Polk, and a quarterback in Michael Penix Jr., who I think a lot of people think can be a Heisman contender if some things go right. They also return a crazy amount of production, and they, again, won 11 games last year, probably one of the quietest 11-win teams that we've seen in a little while, capped off with a win over Quinn Ewers in Texas last year in the Alamo Bowl. But I think that they're also a team that, if they're able to get through USC and win the Pac-12, they could potentially cause a noise in the playoff.
Michael Penix Jr. in his 10th year of college football, it feels like at this point, quarterback for Washington.
Those are some of the most fun ones. Actually, let's go along those lines. One of the things for me, Shehan, I don't know about for you, but I imagine it's probably the same, is about appreciating college football is not just watching the top teams, but some of the teams or players that are just really fun, the ones that make you giddy to watch them, even if it's ultimately going to be a 7 or 8 win team, or even if it's a player that's on a 7 or 8 win team. What is a player or one of those programs that you're just going to be giddy to watch, even if they're maybe not one of the cream of the crop in college football this year?
Yeah, I mean, how much time do you have? But I think that for me, I'm going to give you 2. The first one, and this is a program that I'm going to be keeping an eye on, not necessarily as a national contender, but as a potential Pac-12 contender. Oregon State has the chance to have an incredible year this year. They won 10 games last year. They beat Florida 30-3 in their bowl game. It was a really impressive performance. And the other part of it, too, was that last year they really struggled at the quarterback position. In their win over Oregon, they only threw for 60 yards. And actually, their star running back, Damian Martinez, is right from the Metroplex. He played at Louisville. So they bring in, though, DJ Uiagalelei, the transfer from Clemson. And while he was inconsistent during his time at Clemson, I think he's going to be a perfect fit for what Oregon State and Jonathan Smith want to do offensively. Their offense is built a lot on pre-snap reads, built a lot on motion, making the game easy for the quarterbacks. For people who don't know, Jonathan Smith was the offensive coordinator under Chris Peterson at both Boise State and at Washington. So I think he's going to make the game a lot easier if they're able to maintain on defense after losing a couple key pieces. This is a team that I think could have a dark horse Pac-12 case. And by the way, keep an eye out in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to be writing about them over at CBS Sports, but this is a unique situation because this is probably their last year as a major conference team with the Pac-12 collapsing. So when you talk about one last ride, this is a real one last ride for Oregon State, and I think it's going to be potentially a lot of fun. The other team that I'll mention as well, and they got a little bit of attention last year, but I think might be even better this year, is Kansas. Kansas brings in Lance Leipold, the head coach at Buffalo a couple years ago, and he's completely transformed the thing and got to a bowl in only a second season. I believe that the stat was last year they won more games than the previous 3 years combined. Mm-hmm. And they made their first bowl game since 2008. And Jalen Daniels is a quarterback that people need to know. He was selected as the preseason Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. And they run a super fun offense. He's one that I think you definitely need to check in for. And if they're able to win 7 or 8, this is just an incredible opportunity for that program.
Terrific stuff as we get ready for the college football season underway coming up this weekend. Absolutely terrific stuff from.
We appreciate you. And also, if you want to give a shout out to your Baylor Bears, because I believe we get a little Waco in our listenership, don't we?
I sure hope so, but yeah, they have a chance, I think, to have a bounce back year as well. So trust me, again, if you keep me on here, I'll talk about all 133 teams.
Look, we'll call you back.
I don't doubt it at this point. To be honest with you.
Look, I love college football as much as the next man. So we will have you on again if you are willing to talk more college football at some point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate you.